point of change is not to force people out. It's not to be a dictator. It's about to continuously evolve and improve as an organization. And I think that if in business, if you're not improving and moving forward, you are going backwards. That's where so many organizations go wrong, is that at the top, the leaders are like, we have to change, otherwise we're done, right? But the people at the bottom of the company, they're just worried about keeping their job. Best projects that I've seen have had that organizational alignment from the top down, where you have a team of individuals who, from executive to the ground floor, are all bought in on the mission, know why they need to change, know what the benefit is to each one of them at a different level.
How to build that alignment without being a dictator and ruin the entire culture?
I mean,
hello everyone, this is Michael Ocean, founder and CEO at Sell Me the Spend. Today I'm super pumped. I have my great friend Nate Joseph on the call, and we're going to chat about a lot of great things that are super relevant to our go-to-market teams and especially change management. But over to you, my friend. How's it going?
Yeah, great, Michael. It's good to see you. And yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Nate Joseph. I'm the head of sales and partnerships at a company called 25. We sit more in the project CPQ space within SAP, and I've been with them about a year and a half now. Prior to that, I grew up mainly in the SAP ecosystem and background within SAP, spent 4.5 years there, spent 4 years at Yelp. So I've been in sales practically my whole career, sat on a global industry team at SAP responsible for their industry cloud strategy globally for professional services. So that was a really cool experience for 2 years. Have been fortunate to travel the world for work and have seen a lot of great projects, and have also seen things go upside down really fast. So I'm excited to talk to you today about this topic of change management, because it's big, it's relevant. A lot of companies struggle with it, especially when it comes to implementing new technology. And I think just with the rapid evolving marketplace with AI, everybody's thinking about it. How do we implement it? How do we use it? But are the people actually ready for it, right? And I think that there's the whole human side of change management that we'll get into. But thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely, man. I'm super pumped. Like, before we get started, so I want to hear your stories. How did you end up in sales? Tell me.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people ask me, like, how did you end up in sales? Everybody growing up told me, they were like, you're going to be in sales one day. And I was just like, what do you mean? Because I was the kid that just never shut up, right? And so, so fast forward, I'm getting out of college, and my best friend just got a job at Amazon in Washington, up in Seattle. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to stay here in Buffalo. I was looking for jobs in New York City, but then I eventually was like, well, why don't I go out west too? So I applied to a company called Yelp, was like fairly unknown at the time, even back in 2015. And I didn't even really know what it was, had never really used it, applied for an account executive role, not knowing what it was. And, you're out of college, you have no idea what you're going to do. And so I applied for the job, get the job, come out to, and it was in Phoenix, and I'd never been to Phoenix, never been out west, like further than probably Indiana at that point. And so I had no idea what to expect. I'm like, okay, it's gonna be a flat desert, and it wasn't. So I came out with my mom. We went to Sedona. I was like, whoa, this is just absolutely incredible. I need to live here. And so I was like, yeah, I'm taking the job. And it was like a measly like $30K a year job, cold calling, making like 100+ cold calls a day, just hand-to-hand combat over the phone with small business owners, like telling them to buy Yelp advertising and whatnot. And it was a wild ride. I mean, I always talked about how it was my limbo years between college and the real world, because it had that like frat mentality of sales, boiler room. They never wanted to call it like a call center, because it was the office. But it was just 2,000+ people hammering the phone all day, every day, battling objections, like asking for credit card numbers over the phone, like plugging them into the CRM system. I mean, it was wild, and it was so much fun, but it established such a good base for me to go out and do enterprise sales, because everybody asks, okay, well, how'd you get into SAP? And it was actually, I was actually really lucky. It was my ex-girlfriend who actually got reached out to by a recruiter there. And she was like, I'm not interested, but she said, hey, talk to Nate. And I had actually just applied for the role and hadn't heard back. And then I get on the phone with the recruiter and I start telling her about my background. She was like, well, you're perfect for this. And I was like, well, I applied like 2 days ago. I'm like, I haven't heard back. And she's like, oh, we closed the role, but we opened up a new role, like classic. Like we just put, she never saw it. So I got really fortunate that I got that intro to the recruiter, and then just went in and crushed the interview, got in, and then just, man, I worked my ass off for the first like two years in sales. Just, it was all day, every day. And then COVID happened. So I had just gotten back from like SAP Sales Academy in San Ramon, and it was a blast. We had over 100 people from all over the world there, doing some world-class training with some incredible trainers and whatnot. Because SAP was really the big leagues, right? Like going from Yelp to enterprise software. Again, it was one of those where I didn't really know what it was on day one. When I showed up, I knew they owned Concur and had ERP, but I never knew what ERP actually was before I got there. And fast forward for 5 years, and I feel like I got a full MBA from SAP, and now I'm running a global sales team looking across multiple millions of ARR and revenue, and focused on growing to that point where, yeah, we get bought and acquired. So it's been quite the journey. And I've been really fortunate to have a lot of great people around me who have helped me get there. I think that's really the net of it always, is if you have good people around you, you'll always find a way up.
That's absolutely it. Like this is a super
Yeah.
interesting journey. Like
Yeah.
starting from boiler
Yeah.
room type of
Yeah.
environment,
Yeah.
cold
I
calling
mean,
and just creating.
what about you? How did you get into sales? Because I don't
That's a
think we've
great.
ever actually talked about this.
That's true, and that's the first on the podcast. Like it's mine is really funny, man. I was a musician. I was not in sales or had no idea about tech. I didn't want to even get to tech, right? And I got these allergic reactions to my cat, as funny as it sounds. So the voice is gone, shows are canceled. Got to do something. You're gonna live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I heard like people say you're really good at sales. You always book, venues randomly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I played literally at this venue that Sting played the other month. It's like, how do you do it? I was like, just I tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
So I started like reading a little bit and did some interviews. And my first tech job, I was selling, Azure Office 365 to, CTOs. And I had no idea, man. It was just such a crazy experience. But to your
Yeah.
point, like you learn, you live and learn. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, like I hated the environment. It's super corporate. You got to just put your, fingerprint and you open the door, you go, you do clock in and clock out.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got some training. You learn about the realities behind
Mm-hmm.
being a salesperson, and then
Definitely.
from there moving forward, I work mostly with startups. I started two other startups myself, so I had to run sales for my own. And then I joined a number of scale ups. So last one was Hopin. I joined very early when they raised Series A, and I stayed with them up till $400 million Series C. And I
Oh,
noticed some
wow.
challenges with coaching and consistent training for reps. Like people were leaving, good talents, and managers didn't have time to coach. An idea of Sell Me
Mm-hmm.
the Spin was born inside Hopin, and it's been almost 3 years that we are running Sell Me the Spin now. And you know, overall, I think I've been in sales for almost a decade, from cold calling and being an SDR to being an AE and managing a team, and I ended up again going back to sales, building something for sales tech. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Building a company basically is sales, right? I mean, that's,
true.
you're out there selling your product, you're out there selling investors, but it's how you sell, I think, is really what's important. Because I mean, there's a lot of salespeople in the world, but there's only a handful that actually do really well. So
Yeah, hopefully we can be part
yeah.
of the league. But
Yeah.
it's been an interesting journey for sure. All right, so Nate, before we hear all the great things from you, because you've been in the space, you have the experience. This is your bread and butter. You talk about change
Mhm.
management all the time with your clients. What is it?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think of change management, I think of people, right? I think of in any situation, whether it's a new technology that you're adopting, whether it's a new habit that you're forming, whether it's a new skill that you're trying to learn, like it all starts with people, and it starts at the core of like believing that you have to change, right? And so I think when you look across organizations, I look at I look at change management inside of organizations very, very much through the lens of technology, right? Because that's what I live in. I live in technology coming in, disrupting, improving people's lives. But at the same time, people see new technology as automation and taking away their job. And so I think there's really a fine line that you have to walk when you're bringing new technology into a business, because people aren't always going to want it, and they're not always going to they're going to fight it, and because they don't understand what's in it for them. So I think the best way to approach change management, I think, is just like you would approach somebody looking to change a habit. Like, you want to lose weight, right? What do you have to do? You first have to admit that I'm overweight. Then you have to admit that, okay, this is a problem for me, and if I don't fix this, it's going to become detrimental to my health long term, right? And so you have to almost be at that breaking point before you change. And I think that's where so many organizations go wrong, is that at the top, the leaders are like, we have to change, otherwise we're done, right? Or our P&L is gonna decrease, our profitability is gonna go down, our shareholders are gonna abandon us, and our company is gonna dissolve. That's what they're worried about. But the people at the bottom of the company, they're just worried about keeping their job, right? They're just
Mm-hmm.
worried about moving their way up the corporate ladder, or not getting fired, and they're not thinking about it from a company's profitability and bottom line perspective. And so when somebody comes in and says, hey, we're changing this, and the person at the ground level doesn't understand why, well, you're on a crash course for a lot of chaos and a really expensive experiment. So I guess to put a wrapper around what change management is, I think it's the way that you communicate with people and get them on board to drive consensus around bringing something new to the table, regardless of what that is, and helping them understand, or getting them bought into why it's important to change and what the repercussions are from not changing. Because I think that's what a lot of people don't talk about. They always talk about the upside of, hey, guess what? When you have this new software, you're going to be able to make all this extra money. And it's like, yeah, great. But nobody's talking about, hey, if you don't do something, you're not going to be able to make payroll next month, or you're not going to be able to invest in this XYZ new business line or product that you want to go out and build. And so when you start to put it in terms of what's at stake, you have to think of it as a balance. And if you don't have more in the bucket of pain than you do in the bucket of, I don't want to change, well, it's going to be very hard to get people on board. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, absolutely. Like that resonates a lot because recently I had two actually opportunities that be discussing the same thing with the CRO. So
Mm-hmm.
they know from the top things are not working. It's very simple. You look at close ratio, you look at what your CEO is struggling in front of your board, and they know the change is happening. It should be happening. If not, then you're out of
Mm-hmm.
business. Then you see some, again, mid-level management, they get on a call, you see resistance, and you see it right away. You see it right away. So that's pretty much what I'm doing today. Or we have a lot of tools right now.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily about the tool. I want to hear from your perspective. How do you help, other partners within the organization? Just imagine when you
Mm-hmm.
work with CROs
Mm-hmm.
to understand the necessity of this change without being
Yeah.
forceful. That's the art
Yeah.
behind it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I feel that I'm from New York, so I've always been a very blunt person. And frankly, to me, like, you want to understand the pain, because if they can't tell you the pain of why they need to change up front, then you get towards the end of the buying cycle, and all the value that you're providing to them has gone right out the window, because that notion of fear kicks in. And so
Yeah.
I see oftentimes in organizations, it's not so much that there's not people that want to change, it's that either the leadership team or somebody towards the top doesn't feel that the process is broken enough to actually inflict that change. So we work in multiple different industries. One is more aerospace and defense, which they are heavily regulated, get a large amount of fines for defective pricing on military contracts. Like they overcharge the government and they get fined. And our software prevents that from happening and allowing them to provide a full paper trail back to the government. So when we're talking to those accounts and those prospects, it's a totally different use case than when I'm talking to a professional services firm who lives inside of Excel and says, hey, yeah, making an extra 1-2% would be awesome. But the thought of making 10,000 people change the way that they price and change the way that they effectively know how to do their job, I don't want to do that. It's not my problem. It's not a big enough problem to get up out of bed every morning and say, hey, I got to fix this. So to me, the companies that we're oftentimes looking to work with are the ones that have a reason to actually go out and change, because at the end of the day, if they don't have a reason to change, then even if they buy your software and bring you in, the people aren't going to use it. If they don't use the software, they're going to cancel the contract, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And you spend all that time working to bring a new client in who's not bought in to what you're doing. So I think it's just important to meet people where they are, though, because you can't force people to buy your software. You can't force people to change. And so you more or less, I don't know, I always say be the cat, not the dog, right? Like attract a cat, not a dog. You call a dog over, they come running over. You call a cat over and they run away. But if you don't bother the cat, they eventually come to you and say, hey, what are you all about? And they start sniffing you and whatnot. And so to me, I'd much rather be a salesperson that lets prospects come to us and talk to us about the challenges they're having versus going out and just knocking on every door saying, hey, you have this problem. We want to help you fix it. So, but it is a big issue within a lot of these organizations. But I ask up front, like, what happens if you don't change? What if this doesn't change? Then what? And if it's not that big of a deal, then you got your answer around where their head's at in this initiative. What do you see in terms of reasons why you see people putting up a wall around change? Because to me, it's very fear-based, but I guess what do you think or see?
Look, we don't serve, let's say, highly regulated industries like yourself. We are dealing with large organizations. The biggest size maybe organization we serve, maybe they have 300 or 400, let's say end users, right? So within these organizations, what I see is senior leadership already noticed the business problem and impact of it. So they want the change. Then when it comes to the operators, especially the ones who can get a lot of benefit from, let's say, tools that we are providing, sales coaching, sales training, make it more consistent. And I think that fear comes from the fact that they're not AI enabled. So most of the people that show resistance, they see this as a threat rather than an actual help. It's like, it's pretty much what I'm doing right now today. So why would I bring a threat to my own environment? But in fact, that will open up a lot of opportunities for you, because all this admin work, all this manual work that you do that don't necessarily position you as a strategic partner within the organization with your leaders, you can get rid of all these bottlenecks for yourself by opening some time so you can actually think more strategically. But some people, again, don't want to be strategic. Like that comfort, it's something that they want to carry forever. But change is not something that you can stop, like especially right now with everything that is happening with AI. So many of these resistance will change eventually. But to me, this is a choice to really jump on the wave. But to your point, we cannot change that. I don't want to change that.
Right.
To me, this is not my job to, change a bad culture or bad fit for an organization. I can give some reality check, let's say, to a CRO, but at the same time, it's your team member. You don't badmouth someone's team member saying like, hey, they are not ready for this change. Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, you just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethespend.ai. So I wanted to hear from your perspective, now that you ask about, let's say, my situation. You work with the CRO, they're completely aligned. The problem is big enough, they have to change. But they need help from someone like
Hmm.
myself to come into the organization, have a conversation with multiple different stakeholders, and help them understand what values they're getting out of, let's say, a tool like mine or any other tool. It doesn't matter. Like the change needs to happen. Now,
Hmm.
the challenge they see is, okay, I'm running a 100 plus salesperson organization, right? I'm not going to be the one who go out there and really monitor everything and make sure that I get high adoption from the tool. It's my
Hmm.
frontline managers, for example, who need to be aligned with this. How to
Hmm.
build that alignment again without being a dictator and ruin the entire culture for your fast
Yeah.
growing, let's say, startup.
Yeah. I mean, alignment across an organization is hard, right? Because when I was at SAP too, we got into some really competitive deals with Workday and Oracle, and they were dogfights, right? And there was a SAP camp inside the business, there was an Oracle camp, and there was a Workday camp, and all of them had their logic for why they wanted that company to win, and oftentimes it felt a lot like politics, and it still does,
Mhm.
right? Where
Yeah.
it's one party wins, one party loses, one walks away happy, the other walks away upset. And so the difference is, like, when you're in a business environment, feelings don't matter, right? At least not, they shouldn't. And I know it sounds cold, but at the end of the day, like, I was listening to Simon Sinek's podcast the other day, and he had on a guy, Jeff Rosenthal, who's an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, and he talks about how one of his first mentors, like, he wouldn't really ask him for help on problems and things he was trying to solve. He would only tell him all the good things that were happening. And the guy said to him, he's like, look, I don't need any more friends. So if you don't need my help and, like, everything's great, like, I don't need to keep talking to you. And that was when the light bulb went off in his head that said, okay, no, like, this guy wants to help me solve a business problem. He doesn't just want to be my friend. And so
Mhm.
I think that the difference when it's politics is these are your neighbors, right? Like, these are the people that are around you who you're trying to be somewhat conscious of, that you don't want to upset them. Where in the work setting, they're like, yeah, tough shit. They lost, whatever,
Mhm.
goodbye. Like
Yep.
you got to get on the train. But people don't just get on the train. They get in the way, right? I've watched projects fail because the Workday camp came in and just crushed everything on the project and just tried to derail it to the point where they fired the CTO, they had to fire a bunch of other people, and just kick people out of the business because it was just so chaotic, right? And it's not anything you really want to see, but it's a reality of this, and I think the best projects that I've seen have had that organizational alignment from the top down, where you have a team of individuals who, from executive to the ground floor, are all bought in on the mission, know why they need to change, know what the benefit is to each one of them at a different level. I think that is where, if you're talking to the CRO, you're of a gold mine, because you're talking to the top guy in the sales org. So he or she sits above everybody else. So your job is to ultimately work with them to go to the people below them and organizationally align on what matters in this project and why do we need to change. And until there's a general consensus with 60-70% of the people on board nodding the head, yep, okay, we get it, because you'll get the other 20% of the people over the line. Those people don't really
Yep.
care. It's the third faction of the naysayers that you really want to just try to bring over to the neutral side and get on board. If you have that, yes, there's going to be issues. Yes, there's going to be challenges. People are still going to resist it, but you're not going to get the level of infighting that I've seen on some of these projects. But I also don't think that you can ever underestimate the political nature of
Mhm.
organizations. So just because somebody knows they have a problem and they need to change, don't ever underestimate the power of the chairman who comes in and says, we're not doing it because
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm not spending the money on it. and it doesn't matter how much it can increase our bottom line by. They see it as, I don't want to spend more money and I don't want to put money out the door. So I think, I mean, with every change initiative, there's pain, and then there's quantified value around what are the outcomes that they're going to see by doing this, and how quickly can you get them there. So to me, that's what we try to focus on. It's like, where are you struggling? What happens if you don't fix it? And by when do you need this problem solved? Because if we can help get you there, and we can save you XYZ, increase profit by another 2-3%, great. That's what they need. But if you can't get there with them and get the people on board, I think it's very hard to get people to see the light, or see the forest between the trees, as they say.
Makes sense. Make absolute
Yeah.
sense. Like what you're saying is something that I've experienced like in the past, even currently. And sometimes you just figure that maybe it's just not a good fit and you need to
Hmm.
just let it go. And I had this conversation with another client the other time, and I was like, look, I cannot change your culture. I cannot change the internal problems that you're dealing with. I can educate them.
Hmm.
I can give you ideas how to tackle some of these challenges internally. But at the end of the day, you are going to make the call. You're going to build that
Hmm.
alignment, within your organization. Who am I just
Right.
to even like get involved into this mess?
Right.
Now, let me ask you this. You mentioned something really interesting earlier. You said on the top, they understand the business problem. It means if we are not fixing it, we are out of business. So this is really clear for an executive level, let's say personnel. When it gets a little bit lower in the line, it's about them. Am I going to get replaced? Am I going to get promoted? Like, what's going to happen to me? Basically, it's
Hmm.
more about personal level gain or losses.
Hmm.
As a CRO, as someone that has that power to
Hmm.
define that what needs to be done, how can they communicate this again without being super harsh? Because if you dictate it, people are going to hate you. And I know we are not
Yeah.
we're in business. We are not
Hmm.
here just to be liked, obviously, but at the same time, like especially right now, everybody talks about it, and I believe in it too. Culture is very important. Culture is
Oh,
important. You ruin the
totally.
culture, people are out. You have
Hmm.
talent churn. You ruin your brand, and this is not what you want to do. And great people don't even go in that direction. So how do you communicate this? If like what's good in it for you does not work, what happens negatively? How negatively you'll be impacted if we don't actually go through change. And just imagine if firing someone is not an option because of fast growth. And you cannot fire
Right.
everyone. Just imagine you have
Right.
resistant team of
Yeah.
sellers
Yeah.
of like 50, 60. How do you really build that alignment without getting into your nasty situations that people say, okay, he's a dictator?
I mean, anytime that, like, just speaking through personal experience, when I'm leading my team, anytime that we're going to go through a change, I start with explaining to them like what the change is and why it matters and how it's going to impact them. I think that if you can clearly communicate like what is going on, or well, I think you have to start with why you're changing, because they need to understand the context and the importance of it. Then you have to get into like what needs to change, and then you get into specifically, okay, how are we going to change? But unless the change is going to directly impact somebody's like livelihood in the matter of they're going to lose their job, which oftentimes isn't the case,
Yep.
you have to just ultimately reassure them that by making this change, they are going to be better off in the long run. And I think that's what's so difficult about it, because it's like a friend that has a drinking problem, right? Like you have
Mhm.
a friend that is off the rails, and you can say something to them all the time, but until they say, hey, you know what, I think I have an issue, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to stop, regardless of how many times you tell them that. And I think it's sort of the same thing in business when it comes to change. It's like you can't force it onto people, and you can't force them to change, but you have to help them understand what the benefit is of change. I think the good news is, in a business setting, oftentimes people will either get on the boat or they'll get off the boat altogether. And again, the point of change is not to force people out. It's not to be a dictator. It's about to continuously evolve and improve as an organization. And I think that if in business, if you're not improving and moving forward, you are going backwards. Like, staying the same size year over year does not mean that you are staying the same, because other companies are growing every year. So you're actually getting smaller every year if you're not keeping up at 8, 9, 10% what the market dictates on an annual basis. It's like if your company's not growing by that much, you are underperforming the market. So to me, I think people will, if it's a company performance issue, and you're saying, look, if we don't change, we're not going to make it, and nobody's going to have a job. I think it's easy for people to change. What's hard is getting people to change when they don't think there's an actual issue, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're a seller and you're hitting your number or getting close to it, and your manager's like, hey, you need to listen to these calls and you need to do all this extra work. You're like, no, I don't, because I'm doing just fine. Right. But
Mhm.
if the sales org's at 20% and the CEO says, look, we have a month, and if we don't hit our number, nobody gets paid and we're all fired. Well, guess what? The people are going to go get on the phones and either battle till the end of it, or everybody's going to walk out. I think it's much harder to drive change in organizations where they feel everything is going really, really well, because better doesn't sound better most of the time, because there's a lot of work associated with getting to better. And I think that that's an underlying thing nobody wants to talk about with change, is that it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort to do. And most people oftentimes, and look at society, right? You have horrible things that happen all the time and nobody says anything. Why? Because they don't want to be the person that speaks up and makes noise and offends somebody. And to me, no, like you have to say something. That is why bad things happen, is because you don't speak up and you don't speak out about it. I guess in the net of it is, when people are resisting it, I tend to deal with it one on one, right? Because I don't think it's appropriate to put people on blast in front of a
Yeah.
audience of people. And if somebody's not fighting it, I want to understand why. I want to understand, what are you scared of? Like what worries you about this change? What's the worst thing that could happen as a result of this change in your mind, right? Because oftentimes the worst case scenario in somebody's head will never actually come to fruition, right? I mean, we have more anxiety internally and more wrongdoing that happens to us in our heads than actually happens to us in reality. The Stoics say, like, don't worry about something before it happens. And I think that in business, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with emotions, you're dealing with highly complex individuals, and then at the top, it's very black and white. Very, we missed our number, we hit our number, and they don't really think about the people in it.
What you're saying is really spot on because what I'm hearing, you shared a lot of great stuff, but one thing that really resonate, and while you were saying, I could just review it in my head because I had this conversation recently with someone, and it was like, my company is very comfortable. So we are
Mm-hmm.
not going to go under if we don't change.
Mm-hmm.
Can we be better? Yes, but you have to look at the ownership. How do they feel about it? Like that
Yeah.
status quo is so real that you can see even our AEs, they don't want to change and they know they're not going to get fired. As simple as that.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
your quota attainment is low, sure. Because we have some big logos, we know we are fed. And yes, it's better to make more, but the size of that problem is not really, you know, massive enough
Mm-hmm.
for even like top level executives to really get their hands dirty and get
Yeah.
into, tough conversations with people, to your point, even in one-on-one setting, by saying that, hey, we really need to do it. Because in reality, if you dig deep, you figure out like nothing really major happens if they don't change. So at the end of the day, to
Yeah.
your point, it really goes back to the business problem. Is it really
Mm-hmm.
big enough?
Yeah.
And the negative impact of it, if you don't change, is going to be disastrous, or
Yeah.
it's just a nice to maybe,
Right.
change today or maybe not.
I mean, the reality of it is that if you're not changing and adapting in business, you're just, again, falling behind your competition. And I don't think that should just be changing at every whim. But any time that you get comfortable, you need to be thinking that, okay, my competitor is right on my heels, and the second I slow down, they're going to pick up and be right on my back at that point. And what I'm going to say probably isn't going to be a popular opinion, but it's true. I mean, most people that hold leadership titles aren't actually leaders, they're managers. And so it takes a leader to drive change, and it takes somebody who can inspire people and motivate them and get them to see the bigger picture and the vision of why this change is going to really impact them in a meaningful way. And I say most leaders, most people in leadership positions aren't actually leaders, because when you look at any of them in the face of anything that goes wrong, there are very few leaders that will say, you know what, that was my fault, that was my mistake, I can own that, that's on me, because everybody's worried about losing their job. And so if you think about change and you think about a
Mm.
large scale digital transformation like SAP, 40% of ERP projects fail. So you have basically a 3 in 5 chance that your project is going to be successful. And if you're a CIO or a CTO that knows that with a digital transformation failure comes their job, they're going to say, you know what? I'm fine the way we are. I don't care that we have a CRM system that we've configured to be an ERP system. Like I saw that once, and it was horrifying to see how they were running their business on a CRM system. But the CIO didn't want to lose their job, and eventually they got fired anyways, and they brought in a new CIO who bought SAP, and we won. But there was a huge stalling point of just mediocrity, right? And I don't think that. I think that most companies accept mediocrity as standard. I think most people accept it as okay work, because I don't know, most people see work as a means to an end, which it is for sure. But at the end of the day, I think you get out of it what you put into it as well. So um, and to me, I think the projects that have been the most successful that I've been around, from a change and just adoption perspective, they've also had the strongest leaders at the forefront of the project, explaining to the business why it's important and garnering their buy-in and consensus throughout the entire process. I think any time that a decision is made in a vacuum at the top and is very driven by dollars and cents profitability, and the company doesn't shy away from it, and they say that to their people, that I mean that can be very demoralizing as an individual that's working inside that company, because they say, hey, I have to bear all of this change at what the expense of your bonus. So I think that's another very underrated, under talked about aspect of change is yeah, to me, it just all goes back to people at the end of the day. And if
Mm.
you don't understand your people and how they tick and what motivates them and all of that, you're never going to be able to effectively communicate change. And it really takes a leader to do that. And I just, again, just don't see a lot of leaders inside of large organizations. I see a lot of managers who have been groomed and built up inside the machine to do as they say, not push back, say yes, and just get what they need to done.
I want to finish it on a high note because you just said it. You just said it. No more
Yeah.
questions. But that's so true because part of leadership is taking risk.
Hmm.
Part of change
Absolutely.
is taking risk.
Yeah,
And
totally.
it's so funny that like I was reading Jolt Effect. It was one of these books, and it's an interesting book. Don't get me wrong. It's like how to de-risk it, how to do a smaller
Hmm.
projects. All these things are valid, right? But any project you run, any new project you run, there is a risk factor to it. There's no
Hmm.
100%, that this is going to be pure success, no problems will happen. But is the leader is really a leader and bold enough to take that risk and responsibility for the entire
Hmm.
org? I think that's what's missing, and you just said it. Look,
Yeah.
really love this conversation. Before we say goodbye, is there anything else that we need to add to help again our leaders to navigate the
Yeah.
change easier?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to tie off on what you just said there. I was listening to a podcast with Astro Teller. He's the head of Google X, so it's like their venture arm that goes off and tries to solve the world's craziest problems. And he said that we try to fail as cheap as possible, and cheap to them may be $100,000, but to Google that is actually very cheap. And he talks about that nothing is a failure, it's just a learning experiment. And I think maybe when you have the kind of money that Google does, you can spend a lot of money to try to fail cheaply, but the whole point is that you have to take a risk in order to actually see something positive on the other side of it. I also think the last thing is, nine times out of 10, change is good, right? I think that if you're quitting smoking, if you're losing weight, if you're cutting back on drinking, drugs, whatever it is, it's always good. It's always for the better. You're not changing to become a worse person. You're not changing to buy worse software than what you own. You're constantly changing for the better. So I think that if more people can just recognize that on the other side of change is actual progress, I think that they wouldn't be so afraid of it and they would learn to embrace it. So yeah, that's my closing remark.
I love it. I love it, man. Really do
Cool.
appreciate you, joining me
Yeah.
today. I
Yeah.
enjoyed the
Yeah. No, thank
conversation.
you.
If someone wants to reach out, first and foremost,
Yeah.
can they and how?
Yeah. Yeah. You can follow me, message me on LinkedIn, Nate Joseph, or send me an email, nate.joseph at 25, the number 20 spelled out, the number 5.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Man. All
Thank
right,
you.
guys. I hope you learned something new. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thanks again, Nate, for joining
Yeah.
me. And see you soon. Bye for now.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad we finally got this done. Take care. See you, Michael. Bye.